everybody. Welcome back to the Geezerology Roundtable. I'm Scott in South Florida. We got our two Missouri guys, Bob in Kansas City area, Dee in the St. Louis area. And today we're going to continue with our discussion of the Joe Cocker discography. We're going to pick up with the second album titled Joe Cocker, which was released on A&M Records in November of 1969. And Dee's going to start us off today to tell us about his memories of this album and what he thinks about it. Take it away, Dee.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, Joe Cocker's second LP. It was his second album released in 1969. So Joe and his backing musicians were busy. Not unusual for this time and space. Artists and groups did, put out 2 albums of material back then. And, particularly he had a good response and from his first LP. So they followed up. And on Joe Cocker's second album, just titled Joe Cocker, was released in November of 1969. And he's in familiar territory here, as he was with the first LP. He's recorded some, he went to the Beatles songbook again. In fact, he went 3 times. He went to Bob Dylan's and other assorted artists. I mean, I think it's overall, it's a strong LP. It's, Joe Cocker is in his blues, rock, gospel / wide-eyed soul groove here. And for folks that enjoyed the first Joe Cocker album, they'll enjoy this, I believe, just as much. Delta Lady is one of my favorites of Joe Cocker on this album. And of course, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. And I believe, I know She Came In Through the Bathroom Window was a single. What was kind of surprising to me at this, I had to recall it, that these songs from, and he also recorded Harrison's Something from the Abbey Road album. It wasn't too long when the Beatles released Abbey Road that he came out with this. So Joe is definitely grateful, obviously, for the Beatles material, and I think they were good on him. But yeah, I mean, it's a rolling, rocking LP. He's backed with the Grease. Well, what was to be members of the Grease band. Here he's under, I don't want to say under the tutelage, but Leon Russell definitely has lead arrangement duties on here with his sort of I'll use the word swampy blues piano, because it's in here too. Henry McCullough's on guitar, and of course, he has the backing female vocals, although not as much as in the first LP. The usual themes of heartbreak and the blues themes are prevalent on here. I like the songs. I like the arrangements. It's traditional blues rock arrangements. The one song I had totally forgotten about, that's the second cut on this album, is Bird on a Wire. And that was written by Leonard Cohen. And I think it's the best ballad on the album. I just really like this song. I think, one of the surprising things about Joe Cocker was, sure, he could do the chuggy traditional blues, English blues revival songs, but I just really like this song. I like the lyrics on it. And I think he does a knock-up job on it. Some of the other tunes, of course, That's Your Business. It's, again, you've got this Leon Russell honky-tonk piano. That's prevalent throughout this, I think. In fact, sometimes on some of these songs, like that one, to me, it's almost like saloon piano, which totally fits in with Cocker's voice and the atmosphere that he, provides. You feel like you are in a little neighborhood pub or saloon. And Leon Russell doesn't disappoint with this. And as far as the Beatle tunes, I think he did a good rendition of each one. He, you know, Cocker doesn't do a bad one, but on something Let It Be, I thought the Let It Be version was pretty much, there was no guitar solo, but it was pretty much note for note the way the Beatles recorded it. But it was okay. You know, Cocker gives his own emotional thumbprint, you might say, on all these tunes. Another up-tempo blues rocker on this album, for me, is Hitchcock Railway. It's got a great little chorus in it, some more backing female vocals. It's a nice song that keeps the album, if you listen to it from start to finish, it's a nice song to keep things together. Hello Little Friend, another song with female vocals, and as we find out later, especially when Joe goes on the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, the female vocals are just a key part of his sound. I think it's his best stuff, actually. And She's Good to Me, I thought it reminded me of something straight out of Jerry Lee Lewis as far as the piano and the arrangement. You know, another under 3-minute rocker. And yeah, it's really, this album is just very enjoyable to me. You know, if you're a Beatles fan, you won't be disappointed. And then the Bob Dylan tune, there was a Dylan tune on here, and which was Landlord. I know.
Dear Landlord.
Dear Landlord. Thank you,
Yeah.
Scott. And yeah, a very it's a typical Cocker iconic interpretation of it, but yeah, it's another solid tune. And I just say all the way around, I didn't find any weak songs. So those were my highlights of this. And the album, I believe, was at one point, it did higher. I think it did better in the U.S. than it did in England. If you like Joe Cocker's initial album, this is more of the same. You know, he did his first 3 albums on A&M Records, and he's in that same groove again. And I think it's not as strong as the first LP, but strong overall. And yeah, I kind of wish somebody would still record like this, but they don't.
Bobby.
Yeah, I want to echo the last thing that Dan said there. I do wish they still made music like this. You know, this album was successful for Cocker. It went gold, reached number 11 on the US Billboard charts. I think Cocker was probably the most powerful soul rock singer of that era. The guy just pours pure human feeling, you know, into his songs. He continued that winning formula here that he had from his first album. You know, I echo a lot of what Dan said. I really like Delta Lady on this album. That was a new song for the public because it was written by Leon Russell, and it was written about Rita Coolidge, who he was having involved in a relationship with at the time. And of course, you know, Rita Coolidge does backup vocals on this album, and she became an integral part of the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour that Russell and Cocker put together later. And of course, you know, she did the Russell song Superstar on that tour, which later became a big hit for the Carpenters. He covered John Sebastian's Darling Be Home Soon. And Sebastian and Cocker both performed at Woodstock earlier in the year. So I kind of wonder, maybe did he hear John do that at Woodstock and said, hey, I want to do that song? Or, you know, was it already in the works before Woodstock? He's once again, you know, backed up by the Grease Band, and they lay down a really solid blues rock groove here. 2 of the Grease Band members, Chris Stainton and McCulloch, you know, both were also on the first album. And you know, the Grease Band you know, a good indicator of their ability. They were picked to be the house rock band for the Jesus Christ Superstar recordings. So they were definitely a group that knew how to lay down, you know, a really good groove. Sadly, this was the last time that they collaborated with Cocker, because the band didn't want to go on tour. So he had to put together, you know, he had to hook up with Russell to do the Mad Dogs and Englishmen musicians. You know, Cocker's got the ability to pick some really dynamite tunes to cover. And I think it's also kind of noteworthy that the Beatles tunes that he did, they almost coincided, in some cases maybe even came out ahead of when the Beatles did them. And, you know, and Let It Be was not on the original album, but it's now on the reissues, kind of as an outtake type thing. Cocker's ability is to be a reinterpreter of material. And, you know, as we talked about on his first album, you know, he's got such a unique ability that a lot of times these tunes become Cocker tunes more than they are, you know, by the original artists. He does have one original tune on here, That's Your Business. He co-wrote it again with Chris Stainton. Not a bad tune, but again, you know, the real standouts are the great tunes that he picks up from other people and then reinterprets and turns on, makes it his own. I think also really noteworthy, there were like 5 female backup vocalists. I mentioned Rita Coolidge. 2 of the other prominent ones, Bonnie Bramlett is on this album, and so is Mary Clayton, that incredible singer, you know, who added so much to the Rolling Stones' Gimme Shelter, and she is on here. We mentioned, you know, the Grease Band. Leon Russell is the music director, and he contributes to it. Brings a couple tunes to the album. And then, of course, you know, Russell was a tremendous collaborator with Cocker for their Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour. So what a great symbiotic relationship those 2 had going on here. I recommend this album wholeheartedly. If you're not familiar with Cocker, you definitely need to dig into this man's early discography. Fantastic soul, blues, rock singer. Great interpreter of material. Can't recommend it more. I cannot over recommend listening to this.
Yeah, I'm going to nitpick a little bit. So I've got a little bit of a different take on this album.
Of course you will.
But yeah, but I mean, it's minor more than major, but it's the only thing that you 2 guys haven't touched on. But I'll get into that here. But first of all, just a little piece of trivia that actually something the George Harrison song, and like Dee said, this album was being worked on while Cocker was in the U.S. Basically for the Woodstock show, which was in August of 1969, and then Cocker was doing a U.S. tour, and then they stopped at some point during that tour in 1969 in California. And this album is actually recorded in Hollywood, California, at the A&M studios. And so it was being worked on while Woodstock was happening. So we don't know exactly what the whole timeline of events of how the songs were recorded or anything like that. There's not a whole lot of information on that. But I did learn that something, the George Harrison penned song, which was released on Abbey Road just a few months before this album came out, as long as She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. Actually, Something was a song that Harrison offered up to Cocker after he heard Cocker's version of With a Little Help from My Friends earlier in the year. And it was at a point where, you know, the Beatles were still going through the Let It Be sessions. They were doing Abbey Road, and Harrison had written all these songs. He went on a bender and just wrote a whole lot of songs, and he couldn't get the Beatles to record his songs, as we all know. You know, that's all part of the Beatles story. So he actually offered Something to Joe Cocker to release as a single, because Harrison had given up on getting the Beatles to record it before they ended up changing their mind and recording it for Abbey Road. So that was actually a tune that Cocker was working on even before Abbey Road. Just a bit of trivia there. That's neither here nor there, but I found that interesting. Yeah, I'm going to knock this album. I like this album. It's a great album. It was one of my favorites back in the day. I was a huge Joe Cocker fan back during this period, and then into Mad Dogs and Englishmen. I was all in on Joe Cocker for a while there, and this was part of it. But I'm going to say that I'm not as enamored with this album. I never really was, but now, listening to it now for a while after being away from it, and then after listening to the debut album, I don't think this one holds up as well as a debut album, and I think there's a reason for it. I think the material is just as good. This is a little. I think he kind of where the first album was just real heavy on the R&B and the standard American blues. He goes more into a rock. This is more of a rock album than where the first one was more of an R&B album. This is a little more traditionally rock. And I'm not saying it's a big shift. I'm just talking about at the edges, right? And I have a little bit of a problem with this one, with the production of it. I think where the first one was just organic and what I call balls to the wall, just let it all hang out on the first album. I think this one, and I blame Leon Russell for this, because I think Leon Russell he and Denny Cordell are both credited as producers, but I think this was really a Leon Russell product, and I think he just he put some restraints on this, and I think he did a little more of the studio enhancements than I think really is appropriate for Joe Cocker. I think he reins Cocker in a little bit. I don't think Cocker is quite as let it all hang out as he was on the first album, and as he will be on Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and as he will be on the next studio album, which we'll get to later. I just find this one a little more restraint and a little more distracting, I guess, because there's obviously there's more echo on the voices in this album. Just the studio enhancements that I just don't think serves Cocker well. But as I say, I mean, I'm just nitpicking here. If you get past that, this is a very strong album, but it's something that I've always felt about this album, and why I've never loved this album as much as I loved the first one, as much as I loved the next couple that he will come out with. It's just, if I were to go back now, I haven't listened to a whole lot of Joe Cocker recently, but if I get a Joe Cocker mood and I want to go listen to some Joe Cocker, this would not be the first place I would go. I would more likely go to the debut. I would more likely go to Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and honestly, I would more likely go to the third studio album, which comes out a couple of years later, and which we'll talk about in a future Geezerology video. But anyway, that's just my take on it. Again, that's nitpicky, and but it's just something that I hear when I listen to it, and I find it a little bit distracting. I like the first one better, and I like Mad Dogs and Englishmen better. I still like this one a lot. There's some high points on it. My favorite track is Hitchcock Railway. I love that track. That's just a great track. And I love his version of Hello Little Friend, Leon Russell. I love that. That's another strong ballad that he sings. I really like that one. I prefer that. I like that one better than Bird on the Wire, but that's just, you know, that's just a personal taste. He does a good job with John Sebastian's Darling Be Home Soon. The only Cocker Stainton song on this one is That's Your Business Now, which is the honky tonk sort of little number that opens side 2 that Dee mentioned. They also wrote She's Good to Me, which was the B-side outtake that landed as a bonus track on this album lately. Good stuff. We didn't mention that Lottie Miss Claudia is on here. Which is, you know, which at that time was just, that was a standard old rock and roll cover that all the good ones did, right? And Cocker does a pretty good job with this one. Dear Landlord, I think that was on, was that on John Wesley Harding? Was that off of Dylan's John Wesley Harding album? Yes, it was. And that's a good opener to this record. Yep, if the first album that we talked about was, I'd say it's 4.5 stars. This one is probably 4. That's just a little notch below the debut, but that doesn't mean that I don't recommend it. I still recommend it. Yeah, the Grease Band, Henry McCullough, Sneaky Pete, Kleino, Alan Spenner, and a lot of these names from the Grease Band. You know, we saw them. They're pretty much like Alan Spenner became a longtime session guitar player, man. He would turn up on Roxy Music albums. He would turn up on Brian Ferry solo albums. Henry McCullough later turned up with Wings. Sneaky Pete Kleino was around for a while, but that was essentially the Grease Band here. They weren't credited as a Grease Band on this album. Everybody got individual sort of featured player credits, but this was essentially the Grease Band. This was the same band that played with them at Woodstock, and actually I think this band recorded a couple of albums later without Joe Cocker, just billed themselves as a Grease Band. I've never heard either one of them, but they're out there. Any final thoughts, guys?
Since, you know, I do want to get the one negative I've got on it. I have an issue a couple times with Cocker not being real clear on his vocal enunciations. That would probably be the only nitpicky thing I would have on it. Without a lyric sheet in front of you, sometimes it's kind of hard to hear what he's actually trying to say on a couple of the songs. Other than that, I still rate it as a really good album. And I want to repeat what Dan said because I emphasize it so much. I wish they were still making music like this.
Yeah.
Okay, gang. Well, that's our look at the second album by Joe Cocker, self-titled, and he comes back a couple years later with another self-titled LP, which will probably be our next Joe Cocker look, since we already did Mad Dogs and Englishmen. Bob and I did when we first started this channel a little over a year ago, but we'll get to that, and we'll be back next Tuesday with another roundtable, and come back on Friday with a bunch of different reviews we have. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate you coming around. We'll talk to you soon. So long.
So long, folks.